So, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on which part of the world you are in. And welcome to today's episode of Roll Call, Season 1, Episode 9. And I am an IIM Kozhikode alumnus from the batch of 2006. So, for many of you, it's one of the very older batches. Once I graduated out, I've been in the consulting field. Worked with Big Four firms, been a partner with one of the Big Four consulting firms. And presently, I'm a co-founder of Primus Partners, which is a new age but very fast-growing consulting firm. Today, it's my privilege and honor to host Professor Pulapre Balakrishnan. And Professor Balakrishnan he is one of our leading economists, and we are extremely proud that he was one of the founding faculty members of IIM Kozhikode and taught the first 11 batches from 1997 to 2007. Professor Balakrishnan has been educated at Moscow, at Madras, New Delhi, Oxford, and Cambridge. DC, and he left and came and joined the newly formed IIM Kozhikode, and we're extremely proud and happy that he did that. He left IIM Kozhikode about a decade later to move as a director to Center for Development Studies in Thiruvananthapuram, where he launched the first MA program of JNU outside of JNU. And then in 2015, he moved on to Ashoka University, where he is even currently teaching. Over the past decades, he has participated in the public discourse on India's economy via his popular writings. And you can read some of them at his blog, at his site, pulaprebalakrishnan.in. With this, I would once again welcome Professor Balakrishnan. Professor Balakrishnan, welcome to Roll Call. Very happy, extremely pleased to have you here.
Thank you very much, Devroop, for this welcome and for that very generous introduction on your part. Just the tiniest of corrections. I was at the IIM for 10 years. So I've really taught initially 10 batches and not 11. But since then, I've taught 4 batches. But yeah, initially I was there for 10 years exactly and 10 batches.
Thanks for the correction. So I probably added one more batch.
Right. No harm. Yeah.
So Professor Balakrishnan, I think the topic which is there in everyone's mind is the economy and the Indian economy. So probably we'll start off with that. But before that, just wanted to tell the audience the format of today's episode. So we will be having a discussion for about half an hour or so. And we will follow up that with questions coming from the audience. So I would request all of you to send in your questions as you are watching it, as you're watching this program. Send in your questions, send in what you would want to know from Professor Balakrishnan. And after half an hour or so, we will move to the Q&A session, wherein we take the questions from the audience that is coming. So that's the format that we have thought of. So Professor Balakrishnan, so the topic that everyone today wants to know about is the Indian economy. So COVID and the pandemic that has set in, this is probably unprecedented. This is something we have not seen. And this has hammered the economy like never before. So as an economist, what would be your suggestions? What would be your key recommendations on how probably government of India can work towards bringing the economy back on track? What should be done?
Well, you're absolutely right about the severity of the onslaught on the economy. Yeah, India has been recognized globally as one of the countries which had this most stringent of lockdowns. In fact, we had a lockdown at a time when we had very, very few cases, if I'm not mistaken, less than 500. But the lockdown was implemented with just a lead time of 4 hours. And so it was stringent and traumatic. And now we are about 4 months after the event. But just as the world has recognized that India has had one of the most stringent lockdowns, it has also noted more on part of economists based in India that the economic policy response of the government of India has been one of the weakest in the world. To give you an idea, it has been estimated that the stimulus, which technically is the additional spending by government in the economy, which is trying to inject demand, which you remember from your macroeconomics course at the IIM Kozhikode, is less than 2%, about somewhere between 1.5 and 2%, 1.8 or something. The figure for the United States is 10% of their GDP. So you can see the difference. And there is a fallacy in the response to this that often is made that, well, the United States is a rich country. That is not the point. We're not trying to say that we should spend in absolute terms what the United States is spending. We can't do that. But we are saying to say, or the point is that in relation to India's GDP, it should have done much more. So the stimulus is about 2%. As opposed to 10% in the United States, I believe over 15% in Japan, something similar in Malaysia, etc., etc., etc. And in Europe, Germany is a country with a very large stimulus. So there are two things. One, of course, the stimulus, of course, is a response in a very aggregative way. You know, it's a macroeconomic crisis at the first level that has been brought about, and you need a macroeconomic response. Having said that, you clearly need, given that infections are spiking, are continuing to rise, and in parts of the country like Kerala, there's been a flare-up again now after a sense of some initial successes at containing the virus. There should be targeted spending on the health sector, personal protective equipment, ventilators, oxygen supply. And it's not really clear to me how much of this has been done, though the Prime Minister has announced that the production of PPE, personal protective equipment in India, has been scaled up very substantially, and I do believe him. But we continue to read of hospitals without ventilators, with oxygen supplies not being available in hospitals. Proper cremation facilities not being available, testing not being available in many parts of the country. So just to conclude this part of our conversation, both in aggregate terms and the specific kind of interventions that ought to have been taken place, I am not sure economic policy in India has been particularly strong or imaginative.
So one of the dilemmas of whenever I speak with governments and senior people in governments, one of the dilemmas is around fiscal deficit, whether fiscal deficit has to be kept on track or whether the government should spend more. So as an economist, what would you suggest the government? Should there be prudence on the fiscal deficit part, or this is the time wherein we need to take measures on spending more? Government has to spend more to revive the economy. So what's your view on this?
Right. I mean, I think in some ways, bringing the fiscal deficit into the picture, which of course a lot of people do, academic economists do, the media does, etc. In some ways, for me, is putting the cart before the horse. The point, quite simply, it's unambiguously the case that government needs to spend more. And the fact that government needs to spend more does not necessarily automatically mean the deficit should go up, because this can also be made up by reducing some subsidies, for instance. Right? You reduce those subsidies, you spend more, because we're not entirely certain about the demand-generating consequences of subsidies in the short run. So in the short run, increasing government spending is the solution. And if you contract subsidies, you get some fiscal space. So it's not obvious that the deficit needs to go up. And I do believe that the deficit is brought in all the time either out of a false sense of alarmism or actually to, in some ways, not do anything. I'm sorry to say this, but that conclusion is inescapable sometimes. Now, finally, I just want to say about the deficit. The general idea is that the budget should be balanced over the cycle. What does that mean? It expands in the recession and moves into surplus in the boom, right? Yeah, it is not necessarily that it is balanced at every stage. So this clearly is a time when there's every reason for the deficit to expand. And in better times, you contract the deficit, you contract spending, and you try and get into surplus. I just want to conclude by saying that here the fact of the United States being a much richer economy is irrelevant. The budget deficit, these are figures from the Congressional Budget Office of the United States, of the United States Congress. The Congressional Budget Office of the United States has estimated that because of the $2 trillion, hold your breath, the $2 trillion stimulus that the United States Congress is implementing, the budget deficit of the United States is going up from 4% to 14%. And I also want to give you a final statistic. In 2007, 2008, during the global financial crisis, the United States deficit went up from less than 2% to around 9%. Hold your breath. It is 4 times. So I think the world over, the implications of all that I'm trying to say are clear. You need to spend more. This will have consequences of the budget deficit. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't worry about it, but this is not the time to worry about it. There will be a time to worry about it once we recover. Yeah.
So, very interesting point that you brought in. So from here, moving to the next thought, and one of the terms which has caught the imagination of everyone is being Atmanirbhar. And I was reading your article. You spoke about being Atmanirbhar in ideas, and it sounded like a fascinating concept. So if you could just tell us a bit more about this whole concept of being Atmanirbhar in ideas. Because
I can only say that first and foremost, it's not an idea of mine. It's an idea due to a Indian philosopher by the name of Kalidas Bhattacharya, who brought up this in an address that he made to a small, it's not Presidency College or St. Xavier's College, but a small college outside Calcutta called Hooghly College. I don't know whether it's in Calcutta or not, but certainly it's not prominent, not a prominent college of West Bengal or Calcutta, I would think. And it's a remarkable speech made in the 1920s. I forget the year. If you haven't read it, Devroop, I encourage you to read it. It won't take you long to read. It's called Swaraj and Ideas. Swaraj and Ideas, right? And it's basically trying to say that for any nation, if you think of yourself as a nation, if you define yourself in some way, not necessarily in terms of culture or religion, but certainly in terms of values, you have to have your own ideas. You can't live on borrowed ideas, right? I mean, this is not rocket science, right? I mean, quite simply, we talked about India and the United States. India and the United States are different stages of their development. They have vastly different economies. And so when you want to fashion something for India, even at a time of COVID, you need to have the Indian economy in mind. You need to have, ideas which are relevant to India. This doesn't mean by any means you shut yourself from the rest of the world, but you certainly need to have ideas which are relevant to you. Of course, Kalidas Bhattacharya didn't have the economy in mind. He had ideas more generally about how we should construct our lives and how we should imagine India. And I think one of the most profound ideas, and my great regret is that I read it very, very late in my life, just about 20 years ago. And I think it's very important that young people get to know that essay. It's on the net somewhere. I'm sure it's called Swaraj and Ideas, which is a self-evident expression, Swaraj and Ideas. He's obviously referring to the national movement of the time, which wanted Swaraj, and he's trying to say, obviously, Swaraj is not just getting rid of your colonial masters. Swaraj is also having your own ideas about how you want to create a new India. So I think that's very, very relevant for India today. And I just want to wind up by saying, from an economic policy point of view, I find it quite interesting that we have a government now which is avowedly nationalist and concerned about Indian culture, which I don't think is necessarily wrong. I don't have a problem with it, but which is completely, as far as ideas on the economic policy is concerned, it completely draws on ideas from one section of the United States. Macroeconomic policy, for instance, all this about fiscal deficits and macroeconomic stability, etc. Hardly irrelevant ideas, but not necessarily the only way to steer India's economy. So so that's Atmanirbhar in ideas. You need to be Atmanirbhar in ideas before anything else. And I wouldn't really be focused exclusively on the present dispensation in India. Somehow, a lot of this started in 1991, where a set of economic policies called reforms were launched. And I think there was a strong argument for reforms. But again, the reforms were adopted from the point of view of trying to imitate the architecture of the advanced countries of the West, which may or may not be suitable to India in every space, so to speak. So there again, we have for the past 25 years, 33 decades maybe, lost our way a little bit about thinking about India, the economy, and all the rest of it. So Atmanirbhar in ideas, I think, is very, very important.
A very fascinating point, Atmanirbhar in ideas. And I think that's extremely important as we move forward, because there's a limit to what we can bring in from the Western world. I think a lot of solutions have to be for India, and a lot of ideas have to be how things work here. At this point, I will again remind the audience who would have may have joined in a bit late, that we are doing this in two parts. In the first part, as we are presently going through, we are discussing with Professor Balakrishnan, and in the second part, we would be taking up all your questions. So the questions that you have for Professor, please shoot it, send in your questions, and we will be taking up all the questions, and Professor will be responding to them. So Professor, another...
Hey, Devroop, let me stop you for a while and just suggest, and please take this in the right spirit. It'll save you a lot of trouble, and it will also make me happy if you just call me Bala.
Sure.
in which case, you don't have to pronounce either my full name or say Professor. You got to agree it's certainly more convenient. But I'll leave it to you. I won't force you one way or the other. Carry on.
Absolutely.
Okay. Carry
on. So look, from an overall Indian perspective, we would come to Kerala, and all of us from IIM Kozhikode, Kerala is something a place very close to our heart. And the economy of Kerala over a period of time has been dependent quite a bit on remittances coming in. And there have been studies which have said that 35% of the economy is probably dependent on remittances. Now, COVID has brought in a huge challenge here as well. And we are seeing people coming back, and jobs in Middle East, etc., not being as secure as it used to be. So, yes, this is a challenge, but what can probably the state government do here? What can the state government do differently to revive the economy in Kerala and maybe probably make it less dependent on remittances coming in?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that this is a very serious problem. I must say, I want to say two things. There are no simple solutions to this. I think we want to be very clear about that. One of the points is that is explained very nicely by the phenomenon, if that's the right word, of hysteresis, which you may recall from your time as an engineering student. Do Do you, Devroop, recall hysteresis in your electrical engineering, I suppose? Or is it physics? I'm not quite certain.
So I'm a production engineer, so I did not do electrical.
Okay, so hysteresis is basically refers or can be interpreted as saying that the system has memory. So you inject it with a certain kind of force or an electric current, and then you stop injecting that. Does not mean that you will go back to the original place. So even if you finally go back to the original place, you'll go through a different route, so to speak. And so what I'm trying to say is that once economies have been functioning in a certain mode, it's not very easy to reverse it and to take it back to some desirable place, which you have in mind. This requires tremendous creativity and would also require resources. Now, there are two things about the Kerala economic situation which militate against this possibility. That doesn't mean that we will not go to a desirable spot, but there are two challenges. One of them is the government, the public finances in Kerala are in a very, very poor state. And I'm sorry to say that the government has not made, governments, not just this one, but even the preceding one, have not made a very great effort to take us to improve public finances. The other is, I'm not sure I have seen sufficient creativity in thinking. There are two fronts in Kerala, as you know, the Left Democratic Front and the United Democratic Front. The Left Democratic Front draw their philosophy from communism, or it seems to be that is the case, because that's a title of their party. They work within certain frames of reference, which I think are utterly unsuited for the present moment in India or Kerala. The other is the United Democratic Front, which has never in the past 60 years in India shown any major kind of economic initiative. They did play a role in the unification of the Malayalam-speaking peoples. Kerala was made of two kingdoms and a district of British India. They played a very important role in bringing them together. But I can't think of a single economic policy that they have, or of great consequence that they have really put in place over the past 60 years. So we talked about ideas a little while ago. Before you get anywhere, you need ideas. I'm very skeptical or I wouldn't say skeptical. I just don't see any ideas of how Kerala should respond to the present crisis, or even where it should be from either of the political fronts. Why are political fronts important? In the first instance, they are important because they govern us, right? Now, you can, in a very idealistic situation, imagine the citizenry moving governments in certain directions, and that's possible. I don't say no. But in the immediate run, political parties rule, they're important, and their ideas will matter. And at the moment, I don't see any great ideas about how Kerala should move.
Okay.
And I just want to conclude by saying, not even the excuse, if you ask me, that the COVID situation in Kerala now is pretty dire, is sufficient excuse that they should not be active thinking about this. After all, you have bodies like the planning board, which are staffed by a very large number of people. By the way, there is a West Bengal planning board also, you may or may not know, which during the left front was a very large body. It's worth thinking about what the planning board of Kerala is doing. I'm not sure I see many ideas that come out of there. So I just want to wind up with that. I can talk about some specifics, but that's my initial response to it. A bit long-winded, but yeah.
That's interesting. So we are in Kerala. So coming back to IIM Kozhikode, a place very close to our heart for all of us.
Sure.
And you have been there from the early stages of the institute. So take us through some of your early memories, some of the early days at IIM Kozhikode, how it evolved, how it moved through the early phases.
Well, I mean, I must say, when I must be very frank and say when the IIM Kozhikode started, it didn't seem like it would have a great future. But relatively soon, within a year, we had a new director take over. His name was Amarlal Kalro. Professor Kalro came after about 35 years in the IIM Ahmedabad, and he was at Kozhikode for 5 years at the IIM Kozhikode. He did a sterling job in actually putting the IIM Kozhikode on a solid track. He was an academic man. He was deeply committed to management education. And he was a laid-back individual because he was quite confident. He was very good at what he did. He was a good academic. So those were the glory days of IIM Kozhikode. I don't think we are anywhere near to that since. I just want to say, half jokingly, Professor Kalro did have one weakness, though. He thought the world started and ended at the IIM Ahmedabad. And as a JNU wala, I couldn't really take that completely seriously. But I had great respect for him, and he was very gracious towards me. I'm not sure what he thought about my ideas. So we had a great working relationship. And since I was a senior verse faculty member, purely by virtue of the fact that I had more gray hair than others, we did work very closely with one another. And I must say, I was very impressed by the man, his intellect, his poise. He was completely at ease here culturally. You understand the meaning of the word cosmopolitanism. Here was this man. He, I guess, was born in the northwest in Sindh. His family came here during the partition. He grew up in the Nilgiris, did his engineering in Bengal and the IIT Kharagpur, did his PhD in the Midwest of the United States, and then returned to India and the IIM Ahmedabad. And he was completely at ease in all these settings, and which is a uniquely Indian thing. And I'm sorry, I must say that we probably see a little less of it today than we did. Indians in the 1950s seemed to be able to move across cultures in this country with an ease that is enviable. And so he represented that, and it was a great time. And I think the students also, the first batch of students, I must say, I want to put this in record that they were fantastic in the kind of hardship they went through. No proper hostels, no proper food, all of it. And above all, I was the placement chairman for the first placement round. The tragic outcome that we were able to place only about 50% of our students. And I don't think students today have the slightest idea how difficult all that was. Of course, we rebounded very quickly. The second batch was placed very comfortably, etc., etc. So the first batch went through a bit of a traumatic time. And I'm sorry we were not able to do as much as we should have done for them. But it was an interesting time setting it all up. And there's also a wonderful relation. I'm so sorry. We had a great relationship with the REC, as the NIT was in those days, the Regional Indian College. We worked together. The principal of the NIT and Dr. Kalro had a great relationship. It was all really wonderful. And Chatamangalam itself was a little sleepier, and the natural environment had not been destroyed as much as it has been by now. And it's all really quite magical, actually. So, and I just want to complete by saying, I don't think anybody gave the IIM Kozhikode a chance. Leave alone the expatriate Malayali who had left, having decided he wanted to have nothing to do with Kerala. They were the most skeptical. But within 5 years, by the time Dr. Kalro was getting ready to leave, we had pretty good faculty, which is not an easy thing to do given our location. And also, something which I want to emphasize, a fabulous campus, right? I mean, I don't think anybody has an idea how difficult it is to construct something like this with public money in India, L1, L2, permits, the whole thing. And it's just amazing. And, Kalro turned out to be a real engineer. He built something, instead of going off to just do some coding somewhere. which is what we encourage our young engineers to do today, I think. But yeah, so all these were my early memories. And I also want to just conclude by saying that none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for our first chairman. His name was KPP Nambiar. I don't know if he was an engineer. Yeah, I'm sure he was an engineer. Or did he have a science degree? I don't know. But he has a degree from the Imperial College in London. He set up an electronics company in Trivandrum, then was Secretary of the Government of India. He was a very generous man and felt very strongly that he was very committed to the idea that there should be an institute exactly where it was, in Kozhikode. And and he was very generous. He didn't interfere in anything, really. And he also brooked no nonsense. I mean, it was a very interesting time, I think, for me, especially for somebody, I'm sure the engineers think of economists as some kind of poets, they don't know anything about the world. And that's not incorrect, to some extent that's true. We're far less familiar with the world than you guys are. So for me, it was a terrific learning experience, just setting up an organization, building something. Yeah, it was a marvelous time. The first few years were really very nice. And I just want to conclude by saying it is not just the lovely buildings and the mess and all these facilities, but I also think the environment was cosmopolitan and liberal, which I want to emphasize is also a very, very important part of an institution, as you yourself know. Yeah.
Sure. So great stories, and the institute has really, really evolved over a period of time.
Absolutely.
And as we are into the 25th year, so what do you think? How do you think IIM Kozhikode should carve an unique identity for itself? Because considering that today there are 20 IIMs, so how do you think IIM Kozhikode should carve an unique identity?
This is a difficult question, really. When I'm asked a question like this, I really respect the marketing faculty, right? It's a hard job to come up with USP and all the rest of it. It's a serious thing, and I'm not very good at that, Devroop. So I don't think I should even try. But I would like to say that something the IIM Kozhikode should do, whether it should do that to have a unique identity, I don't know. I think it should be more involved with India. It should have ideas for India. You can't just, be completely swamped by OB theory or Philip Kotler on marketing or whatever the textbook that young people read now in all these areas. They're very important, but I think there must be some concern with India, and to see India as a place where you can be creative, and which is crying out for creative solutions, right? Now, if you go to a very advanced country like Germany or the rest of your family in India, probably be very proud of you. But between you and me, I think it'll probably be a bit boring, yeah. I mean, they've solved all their problems. There's nothing more to do. Here we are just struggling with so many problems, right? Including down to kind of basics. I mean, maybe somebody in the IIM Kozhikode can do a case on the airport and the plane crash, right? I mean, which we had in Kozhikode 2 days ago. All these questions like was the airport prepared to have these kind of flights? Can there not be some regulation? Can we not, for 2 months of the year, do away with night flights or wide-bodied aircraft? How are these decisions taken? What is the role of the politicians? And also, by the way, what is our role as citizens, right? We want to go off to the rest of the world and we have to somewhere else to make a lot of money. But we also want to come back for Diwali, and then we want to be back for something else. And maybe we want to, you can't do. I mean, it's a small state with a fragile topography. Can you really have that kind of lifestyle in India? We should be thinking about all this. And I think IIM Kozhikode has a great opportunity to be involved in all of this. And I just want to say, I'm a little disappointed in general, and I'm particularly disappointed that students don't seem to have a view on it, or at least I don't know. That's not peculiar to the IIM Kozhikode. When the IIM was set up, the older IIMs were the ones who actually set up a syllabus for the IIM curriculum. And there was a course called the Indian Economy, which told students about India and partly a little bit of history where we've come from and a little bit about the rest about the present state of the economy. I'm sorry to say there was never real very sufficient interest in that. And I just want to conclude, partly to tease you guys, Devroop. I believe the IIM Kozhikode goes and asks alumni how the courses should be organized, and I believe it was a decision which originated in a meeting with the faculty, that they not faculty with the alumni, that they didn't think studying the Indian economy was a necessarily useful thing, and I personally think that's a disaster. I mean, you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going, and you still think you're a manager. And partly also, I just want to conclude by saying, guys, the global economy is now going to just kind of hobble along for the next 5 years at least, right? At least 5 years. The possibility of people going out and trying to making easily a career in the rest of the world is slim now. I think we need to focus in India, and it would make a lot of sense for the IIM Kozhikode to be part of that movement, to study India, to look at possibilities, to see what we can do to have a better future. Thanks. That is a bit long-winded. I'm sorry, but you asked for it.
So we will move to the next session, next part of today's episode, which is taking questions from the audience. And we have got quite a lot of very interesting questions which have come up. So first I'll request Professor to take this question from Anirudh. So Anirudh, his question has been that China seems to be the only gainer from the current situation. So how do you foresee China playing this out as things progress through this crisis?
Hello, Anirudh. I saw you written down, and I remember you. It's Anirudh Phadke, I noticed. Well, I'm very happy to be in touch with you after almost 20 years, I think. Yeah, very nice. Anirudh, I'm going to disappoint you by saying that I really don't know much about China, and I would be, talking to my hat if I was going to say too much about it. But I'm not so sure that China has a great future, for the simple reason that globally there is some pushback that China has received, partly because there is a sense that it may have held its cards a little too close to its chest as far as the early spread of COVID-19 is concerned, i.e. didn't alert the world quickly enough. And secondly, China also has border problems. At least it is flexing its muscles, but that's not going to make any country particularly popular with the rest of the world. China has disagreements of some kind with Japan, countries in the South China Sea. It has, in my view, completely unacceptable approach to Taiwan. It's openly at war. It is in economic war with the United States. The UK doesn't seem to be very well disposed to it. So I don't know. And I think also, I just want to conclude by saying that I'm not sure we should really be consumed, we in India, by China envy. We should just get on with our job, build our roads and bridges, educate our people, have some decent health facilities. Yeah, there's enough for us to do without worrying about China. Where will China be in 2025? Frankly, between you and me, I don't care. I mean, India is now pretty strong to hold its own, and it must do everything it can to make life in India worth living, in materially anyway, for its people. And we're doing far too little on that. Far, far, far too little. So yeah, I think we have enough on our plate without worrying about China. I'm not sure I've answered your question, Anirudh, but good to be in touch with you after so long.
So I think China has dispute with every country in the world. I think it's very difficult to find a country where they don't have a dispute.
I suppose Africa, Devroop, for argument's sake, Africa, they've probably also been channeling quite a lot of money to Africa, but they don't have a border with it. so they can afford to be high-minded and generous and all the rest of it. Yeah.
So next question is from Pranay Rao. Pranay, incidentally, is my batchmate at IMK.
Uh-huh.
So his question is, do you believe that as a nation we are doing enough to tide over this crisis?
Well, Pranay, thank you very much. That's a question I believe I have some credentials to answer. On whether we're doing enough as far as from a purely macroeconomic point of view, I've written about it this extensively. All of it is on my website, the articles. I have a whole seminar on it, a webinar rather, put together, by the way, by the students of Ashoka University. So that's an initiative rather like yours. And I've categorically said that the economic response is extremely weak. And I worry seriously about whether the government appreciates how serious a problem it is. The stimulus is weak. We see very little else. The Prime Minister does not seem to be giving enough time for it. So apart from I've already in some ways answered this question in my conversation with Devroop at the very beginning. I think it was the second question. Apart from the macroeconomic stimulus, which should be much, much more stronger than it has been, the government should also be focusing on the medical sector, increasing, making available personal protective equipment. By the way, I just want to say there's been the government has been written to by the Indian Medical Association speaking about the number of deaths of doctors from COVID. So we should be in many, many ways taking far greater care of our frontline workers, which is not just the doctors, the nurses, the sanitation workers, the lab assistants. Or this requires money, and this requires the politicians to represent us to these people, saying how much we appreciate what we're doing. I'm sorry, I don't see enough of that at all. I see, politicians in all sorts of places where they shouldn't be, in religious houses, for instance. But they should actually be representing us, the citizenry of this country, to the frontline workers and telling them how much we appreciate what they're doing for us. And channeling resources to them. And we don't think of them as frontline workers, but I did see something on the net which, frightened the hell out of me about sanitation workers somewhere in some big city, or very likely Delhi, by the way, clearing garbage, including syringes, with their bare hands. I mean, how much money does this require? I mean, we're just not doing enough. We're just not doing enough. But I want to conclude by saying, as always, as with everything else, I spoke about this when Devroop asked me about Kerala and we were discussing the crash. There's also the question, are we doing enough? Do we maintain social distancing? Do we use masks all the time? These are all questions we should ask ourselves. And parts of the world which have been disciplined, we're told, were able to kick the virus more easily. Some of them in the case, such as the case of Sweden, without actually having a lockdown. The role of the citizenry is very important in that. Yeah, so that's my response to you, Pranay.
So, Bala, the next question I wanted to take up is from Mahesh. So his question is, Sorry,
Devroop, do you know which batch he's from?
No, I don't know. Mahesh Parameshwaran. So his question is, do you think the new education policy will encourage creative thinking and try for Indian solutions?
I wouldn't rule it out of court. I mean, I think it's an important thing and we should engage with that. I mean, I would say that two things which matter very much, I'm not sure how much attention it's been given, is teacher training is very important. Teachers should be trained and they should be empowered. They work in highly bureaucratized environments. We don't know how much freedom that they have. If you want to be empowered, you need to be given freedom. So I think the approach to teachers and how teachers are governed is important. And that question doesn't really come up very much in the NEP as far as I've seen it. And the other is what the syllabus would look like. I don't know what the syllabus looks like. I'm sorry. Well, that is not the job of the committee in any case. The committee has spent a lot of time on the architecture. Now 3+5+3+3 as opposed to something else earlier. So that's that architecture, that's important. But I would also worry about the content a little bit. I don't know. I'll wait and see. But I also just want to say, while on the one hand, the idea of early learning is very important. There's, by the way, in case you don't know, there's a economist by the name James Heckman, who, after having spent his lifetime working on very technical issues, in particular, he's known best, he's a Nobel laureate, and is known best for a idea in econometrics called the selection bias. Has spent much of his later career writing about early childhood. And you know the arguments, the brain is the most plastic at that time, therefore learning really happens. You pay it, all that's very good. But I would worry once again about what level of care these children are going to be given in these Anganwadis, and what kind of resourcing are we going to do. They're both important. Even after all these years, I'm not able to put my finger fully on whether it is resources or governance which matters more. I guess they both matter, and I'd wait and see. But the content is very important, and to what extent the teachers are both trained and empowered is going to matter a lot for schooling. But I just want to say, not so much because I think that university education in India is so great, but I do believe that this is the moment to actually swing public attention anyway to schooling, and see that our schools are well-resourced and our children are learning in schools. Now, I just want to conclude by saying you're probably all aware of the NGO called Pratham. Are you aware of it? You should look at it in the net if you want. And you've obviously been reading that, their tests show that the level of learning in India's school is appalling. And till last year, at least, even though it was bad, it had not declined. But in the last year, it actually declined at a time when there is privatization. So the simple idea that, it's all about government schools being terrible and private schools are better, etc., something we should think about very carefully. And we should worry about schooling very seriously. More than higher education. I want to emphasize that.
Sure. Yeah, I think schooling is the early education is the most important part. So moving on to the next question, Bala, it's from Ajay.
Ajay.
His question is it possible for us to create something similar to Silicon Valley or even Shenzhen in India? Can we really be that entrepreneurial? Can we create something like that?
I wouldn't say it is impossible. I mean, really not impossible. I want to be partly facetious and say, it's also, of course, high levels of intellect. But the city has to be a hospitable environment. And it's not clear to me how physically hospitable Bengaluru is now. It's full of traffic jams and power failures and water shortages. Is it an attractive city? I mean, Silicon Valley is near San Francisco, which is a fabulous place to be in. There is social life, there's intellectual life. People, want to be seen in certain cafes. There's a very, very well-known one called El Faro. I don't know if you guys know of it. Know the name EL, as in the Spanish L, Faro, Faro, which is supposed to be a place where everybody goes to because they want to learn ideas. Now, think of it. I mean, it's equally true about the IIM Kozhikode. I mean, where the students have, so much of work to do, and they have to stay up till 4 a.m. to do some assignment or the other, that they don't socialize. You should socialize. That's where you get the best ideas from. While the IIM spent so much of time, showing off that the students were made to work till 4 a.m. And somebody from IIM Bangalore once told me, we even work on Christmas Day. Is that something to be proud of? I mean, this is crazy. Indians don't seem to have any sense of balance between work and life, right? So, Ajay, my answer is yes. I don't see any particular reason why we can't have Silicon Valley here. We have very intelligent people, but you need cities which are hospitable, which are allow people to have a good physical life, which is the base to have intellectual life. But I don't want to be entirely facetious. Also, Shenzhen, of course, is slightly different from the Silicon Valley in also being a manufacturing hub. Am I right? Devroop, you know a little bit about, I don't know enough. Is that correct? Shenzhen's also a manufacturing hub. Am I right? No?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that sense, it's different from Silicon Valley. So manufacturing hubs, as you know, require physical infrastructure of a kind that India has really never bothered to build in a serious way. And there was a time when there was an effort to make these special economic zones. Now we don't even hear about them. We should realize how expensive it is for the country to launch all these schemes and then to jettison them within a matter of months, or years, a couple of years. So special economic zones, etc., are potentially areas where you can have good infrastructure. So yes, build infrastructure. I think is a large part of what we should be doing in India in any case. So in principle, it's not impossible to have these things in India, Shenzhen. Yeah, but it also requires bright young Indians to be in India, right? I noticed that 2 out of these wonderful 3 alumni who have put together the show and with whom I've been enjoyed so much interacting over the past 3 weeks, who've done this great job for you guys, the rest of you are on the show, and myself, of course. I noticed that 2 out of the 3 of them are outside India. Well, you're not going to, I can tell you, you're not going to have a Silicon Valley if all the best Indians are outside India, guys. You also kind of got to come here, come back and, pay your dues a little bit. Yeah. So I have repaid all the subsidy that I've got with that, terrible food in government institutions in India. No bijli, no pani, no sadak. I think I would encourage a lot of young people to come back and at least do it for some part of the year. And and be the pioneers in starting a Silicon Valley or Shenzhen in India. Ajay, I hope you'll be one of them.
Sure. So, Professor, we'll probably will move to the last questions.
Okay.
Last question.
Yes.
So the last question is from Ravi Menon, and Ravi, who was my senior at IMK from the 2005 batch. So the question is that you have suggested that the 90s reforms was not entirely what was needed, and these were borrowed ideas. So what do you think can be the ideal steps today in terms of reforms?
Yeah. So, I worry a little bit about the expression reform. I'm not sure, and I don't mean to be difficult, but I'm not sure what it means. Right? Does it mean that you change some policy? If it's only about legislating against some existing policy, taking it out of the rule book, I think it's a very limited approach to the economy. India needs to, we've already covered this. India needs to build infrastructure, both hard and soft. Hard, with somebody wants Shenzhen in India, well, very good idea. But first build the roads and bridges, and then build 24-hour electricity, which does not fluctuate, water supply, waste management, and then you'll have a Shenzhen in India, right? So that's hard infrastructure. And then there's the soft infrastructure, which is health and education, right? And you don't really need me to tell you more about this. I'm kind of shocked by not just stories, by screen grabs or photographs of dead bodies beside live patients in one of Bombay's most prominent hospitals. People lying, writhing on the floor in Patna's main hospital. The absence of cremation facilities in Chennai. What are you talking about? I mean, so that's what you should do, Ravi. You should build infrastructure, build roads and bridges, and good schools, and see that your You have waste management facilities. Your sewage is not getting mixed with the drinking water supply. And stop worrying about China. Who cares, guys? What China does, make sure you have clean air and good roads and nice places to drive to in the evenings for a drink and a conversation. We're not doing all that. We're just worrying about some macroeconomic reform. Can you put a number on the fiscal deficit? Guys, I can tell you there is no economic theory which tells you the fiscal deficit should be 3.4 or 2.9. I can tell you that much. These are all just bunkum. Sure, you don't want to be profligate, but as I said, you balance the budget over the cycle, right? That is the intelligent thing to do, right? When private sector private sector investment is booming, then government steps out of the picture. When private sector investment collapses, government steps into the picture. Is it rocket science? To me, it isn't. You can't have what is called rules for all seasons. Yeah? It's just kind of stupid, frankly. And so Ravi, I hope I haven't been too harsh in answering your question. And this is really what I have to say. It is almost time, Devroop, and you're the boss. I don't want to what's the right word now? In any way intervene. But if there are only just 2 or 3 questions, I don't mind doing. But there are too many, is it? So, anyway, I'll leave it to you. I don't want to. Yeah, I think there's some suggestion that we conclude. So I'll leave it to you.
Sure. So once again, thanks Bala, thanks Professor Balakrishnan. This was a wonderful session, wonderful interacting with you. Great ideas, great thoughts came on. That government needs to focus on healthcare spending. Probably we are not doing enough. Your idea about that budget or the fiscal deficit, etc., needs to be balanced over a cycle and need not be something that we fret over too much. I think that's something great, and that's something which should make future economists think more about it. Creativity in thinking is another idea which I take away from me and for many of us from here, that yes, we need to be creative in thinking, and not just in terms of economic policies, but probably in everything we do. So great takeaways for me, for everyone over here, and it was wonderful interacting with you. Thanks once again for coming on this session. Thanks.
Thank you, Devroop, very much for conducting this. I think I should take the opportunity to also thank, even before I thank the audience, thank Namit Najib and Ronald Phillip, who have been kind of very modest and stayed in the background, but put together this terrific session and this great technology that I've been able to speak to so many of you. And thanks to everybody in the audience for being here, for taking time out. And coming and being on the show. And it's let me just end with a thought. I mean, since what's the word? Let me suggest this to the organizers of the show. Maybe the alumni association can, IMK Alumni Association can put together a Zoom party every 3 months or something, right? I'm serious. That's a great way to get together and talk and enjoy and remember. So thank you very much once again, Devroop, and everybody else. Good evening and bye.
Thanks and bye for now. And we hope to see all of you back for the next episode of Roll Call. Till then, bye from all of us here.